What really stands out to me is this sort of career dedicated to academia and the search for knowledge, and are looking to make a stronger move into decentralized science.
We moved from 50 people to 50 million people. We're doing that, trying to change the way education is made and how to teach science in a more open, sort of not so trapped with expensive instruments.
What has your experience been as a career academic?
A lot of the science today is being done in academia, research laboratories within the academic context. And I love the science, I love research. So I've been changed first from neuroscience, then to ecology, into physiology. I did computer science for a while.
Do you think decentralized science is something that could combat that issue in its current form?
The biggest problem is that it's a sort of winner takes all game. That I think is turning off a lot of people and a lot of creativity and a lot of good energy. There is where DeSci has a fundamental role to play.
Juan, welcome to the DeSci podcast. We're so happy to have you. Please, could you introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about your background?
So I am Juan Keymer. I originally from Chile. I was born there, grew up, went to high school there, did my undergrad studies there in biological science at the beginning. Then I got into neuroscience. Then I got a little bit into the cybernetics of the nervous system. Reading Wiener, I decided that I couldn't read anything, so I entered to study mathematics as well. I did both for a while until I met someone that gave me a fellowship from the United Nations and UNESCO, and I went to Italy, where I met who will become my advisor, and he told me to pick which one of the two. So I finished biology, was the fastest I could finish. And then I moved to the US, where I studied mathematical ecology, theoretical biology, like evolutionary biology. Then I did that for, I was very lucky that I could do it relaxed. So I did that for around like half a decade, 5 years or something. Then after that, I decided I wanted to connect back to cell biology. So I studied sort of a postdoc in theoretical biophysics, studying sort of cognition in bacteria, more or less how molecular sensing networks in bacteria implement memory, particularly chemiotaxis, how they rule behavior. Doing that for a while, I did that, a couple of postdocs there at Princeton I studied first in the biology department, then I moved to the physics department and the molecular biology department. I decided that before in mathematics, I was studying topology, the role of space. In ecology, I was working a lot on the landscape ecology, how sort of space has to do with biology. This is sort of what I like to call the biology of adjacency. So then doing that, I discovered a paper from somebody in physics that was doing nanotechnology and trying to put bacterial cells in sort of nanofabricated environments. And then I thought that was the perfect place to apply sort of landscape ecology, spatial biology concepts to design these microfluidic chips and to start building these ecologies on chip. So then I moved to physics. I worked with Bob in this area for a while, where I sort of settled what I do now. And after that, after kind of like 15 or 12 to 13, something like this, years at Princeton, I decided to go to Holland, because I always loved Holland since I first saw it for the first time. So I wanted to live in the Netherlands. So I got a job offer so they were starting a new department it was called nanobioscience. So there were the people coming from nanotechnology. A bunch of physicists wanted to branch onto nanotechnology and biology. So I joined this super branch new department. I was the first non-Dutch. There was one Canadian, actually, half Dutch. It was like 4 people, and then I was there for like 5 years, studying my own lab, and became a professor and all of that, tenure track, blah, blah. And then I met my current wife, So then she's Dutch, but then we went to vacation to Patagonia. She saw the forest there and the ice fields and all of these things. And then she asked me, why don't we live there? What are we doing in the Netherlands? So we found a job the closest possible in Santiago. At the beginning in Valdivia, didn't work out. Then we moved to Santiago, worked there for a bit. And then we finally ended up in Patagonia, in a tiny town of like 15 people. And then we went from in a lab, because we run the lab together, we do everything together. She's also a biologist. I started to get into sort of open hardware, because sort of we went from the very high-tech sort of academic industrial complex dominated side to basically in the middle of nowhere. So we started getting into open hardware and to citizen science, because a lot of people there care about their ecosystems. And with that, I started to travel a lot to China because I was invited by some ex-postdoc that I met when I was a professor in the Netherlands, who was now a professor in China. And there we started working a lot with open hardware, traveling a lot to Shenzhen. And slowly then we decided then that we were missing people. So we moved from 50 people to 50 million people. And now we live in Shenzhen for like 2 years. And we're doing that, sort of trying to implement open science hardware to basically change the way education is made and sort of how to teach science in a more open, sort of not so trapped with sort of expensive instruments that are closed things and stuff like that. So that's what I'm now. I'm in an institute here in Shenzhen, and that's who I am these days.
Wow, that is such an incredible background. I almost feel like one should write a book with all of those different stories in different places and different people. And I think what really stands out to me as well is that this sort of career dedicated to academia and the search for knowledge within the sciences. And I know that you've recently or sort of joined our DeSci Edu course and are looking to make a stronger move into decentralized science. But I think maybe to like take a step back from that, I would like to understand, like, what has your experience been as a career academic?
I mean, I think academia has, so there's two components. One is science itself, and I love science. And, you know, this typical sort of place that we all think a lot was like, you know, this sort of mythical Bell Labs, or sort of where you would do, and a lot of things were discovered there, and you had a protected space to learn and to discover. But somehow a lot of the science today is being done in academia, in like research laboratories within the academic context, and that brings another component to it, which is academia in itself. And I love the science, I love research, but academia also has a component of developing academic programs and comply with particular sort of specific sub-communities that are focused on developing those programs. And those programs have a lot to do, not with science, but to, you know, be creating things that will attract students, generate things that you teach so you can be a professor. And a little of a part of it, which is more like the church, basically, which is kind of like to get tenure, to become a sort of well-known professor. And that on its own has some sort of a dynamic that I didn't kind of like much. I've been changing places, not much for that reason. It ended up being for that reason at the end, but the original reason is that I've always been like a sort of like Freeman Dyson wrote this very beautiful essay called Frogs and Birds, or Birds and Frogs. And he has to do a little bit of how mathematicians, there's two types. You know, you could be frog and you're down there and you go to the, you know, dive deep into a problem, or you're like a bird and you like to have this sort of bird view of the whole thing. And I've been much more of a bird. So I've been changing, you know, first from neuroscience, then to ecology, into physiology. I did computer science for a while. So that is really nice. And when you're a grad student, I was very lucky. I was very protective advisor, very nice. Also, my postdoc advisor was very, very nice, and I was very well mentored. And then, unfortunately, I saw later, as I became an academic, that either because the times have changed or the places have changed, was less and less so. So I always had a problem because as you're aging in the system, in the academic system, more and more these other elements of what does it mean to get tenure, what kind of things you need to do to get tenure, and sort of to catch up, especially when you are in a sort of place that is entangled in the academic industrial complex, and sort of have a lot of demands for bringing money in, winning big grants, publishing beyond humanly possible, meaning that you have to basically run an industry. So you can write, let's say, at least 3-4 sort of high impact things every semester. You start getting most of your energy and your talent, and you think that you are really getting higher for becomes a lot of that. And that I was never happy with that. I always want to change. And wherever people are big or wise in an area, I started to discover they were not so much in the other one. So I saw that at the beginning when I studied math and biology in parallel, but then later it also applies if you change from, let's say, mathematical ecology to basically experimental biophysics, and then total different communities. They do make academic alliances because, you know, with this push for interdisciplinary science, it's also become some sort of a target for these people building this sort of academic infrastructure. But you don't much have the the freedom as you age. When you're younger, of course you do when you're a grad student, but as you become faculty and you need to basically develop the place or develop programs, less and less so. So that was my biggest disillusion. And another one was that it's very tied to the industrial complex. So there is also like some sort of like a neo-colonialist, like north-south relationship, which I also saw a lot when I moved back south after being in the north for a long time. So all of those things got me a little bit sort of stray away from the path, to say it in a way. And that brought me to DeSci all the way from citizen science, from open science. And since I've been a crypto junkie since back in the day, since Bitcoin times, I think Bitcoin always saved my life, because a lot of my independence comes from the lack that I got into Bitcoin very early. So then I thought DeSci was kind of a natural thing. So when I bumped it into DeSci Bangkok, I just saw the light at the end of the tunnel, and I decided that I want to, dedicate the rest of my life to this in whatever form. That's why I took the class, right? To basically find the form.
Yes, amazing.
But I see the light here.
Yeah. I've always believed that like the actual perfect user of DeSci is an academic who is also a degen, and is kind of like has a light bulb moment where it's like, oh my word, I'm going to put these two things together and create like this new pathway forward. But there was something that you were saying that I think I'm really interested in, which is obviously decentralized science is all about sort of creating equitable science, and the nature of decentralization means that, you're in China right now, I'm in currently in Dublin, and, we work with people from all across the world. And it's really, really a global movement. And then you were speaking about sort of how granularly different you had different experiences in academic in the global south and the global north. Could you unpack that a little bit more for me?
Okay, I guess. Well, I guess there's, for example, I cannot give you the sort of like the view that is objective or anything, but my subjective own experience, for example, there are trade-offs. So, and it's also different from people that are remain in the south all the time, or you go to the north for a little bit versus having spent time in the north. And it also depends on how sort of well connected the institutions that you are part of. So let's say in the north, in a well sort of known famous place, it's a lot easier to publish papers. It's like you are much more close to basically where the publishing industry sort of attached with the academic complex, and then publishing with high impact factors, with getting the attention of editors. Sometimes, you get the opportunity when the stories are not even there, right? I mean, the place in the journal has already been sort of negotiated by other fact powers before you even put the story. Well, when you're in the South, you first need a story, and then you're screaming for someone to hear it. And some even people get into like ugly sort of neo-colonialist alliances, so you can get the spot on the journal, and you get co-authors in the North, etc., etc. So it is a lot easier, publish with a lot more ease while I was in the North. It's also easier to get the kind of money, the amounts of money to pay for these things, or to pay for all the associated parasite industries around getting these things on journals. That's sort of the good side. I mean, the more restrictive side is that since everything is more industrialized, so you are just sort of like a little bolt in a much bigger machine. So whenever you write things, the money fluxes go to accounts from institutions that then you don't really understand how they work. They are complicated accountant systems that require specialized people to sort of make all of these dots come together. And therefore, you cannot be sort of that creative what you do with the money. It's basically what you are allowed to do with the money. Well, in the South, if you do get the money, and there comes the advantage of having gone to the North and coming back, because of course, then you get to sort of prestigious places. And then academic cartels, somehow they co-opt the money. So for example, if you belong to a institution that is in the system, money will flow to that institution. So you're not alone trying to get the money. You're part of the flux. But once you get the money there, since it's less industrialized, the money, it's more free in the sense that it's less money, but you have much more control of what you do. So if you decide, I don't know, I'm going to go to Liberland for a workshop, you can do it. Things like that.
Okay, interesting. I'm curious, do you think decentralized science is like something that could combat that issue in its current form?
Well, I think I think yes, because I mean, those were the difference, right? And the difference has to do basically with the level of industrialization. I mean, even the tourist industry has sort of the same things that the academic industry has. At the end of the day, academia, especially, don't forget, for some countries like Australia, for example, it's an export industry. So academia is an industry. A lot of people go there to study because once you study on these places that specialize in bringing in foreign students to give them degrees and send them back, it's just another industry, just like tourism. I mean, yes, they do science, but science is also done in laboratories, and it will be done in DeSci. We can get to that. But but those are the difference. But I think what is more important for the DeSci discussion is the similarities. So they do have in common, though, even though one are more industrialized and I have certain aspects that are different and the other one is less, they are both in the same gradient from less industrialization to more industrialization, but pointing to the same direction. And that direction, it's a little bit sick. I mean, in DeSci, we have this clear, right? I mean, what are the problems with it? And the biggest problem is that it's a sort of winner takes all game, and a winner takes all game, it brings in a certain type of personality, which means that there are other ways of being, other ways of doing science, like alternative masculinities, femininities, you name it. We can spend hours getting there in the spectrum, but all the other parts, all the other ways of doing things get excluded, because to play the game of a winner takes all, hyper productivity, narcissistic, sort of rising star type of sort of celebrity type of culture that modern academia these days have, it requires one type of personality. And of course, there is the alpha one that does it and becomes the capo of the cartel. But if you want to survive, even if you don't want to be the capo, you have to find a place either as a lieutenant or a protected, backstage individual. But if you don't like that game, you leave. And a lot of people leave. And also with time, the more intense this game gets and the more resources co-opt, the less mentoring there is. So therefore, the newer generations either more extremely go away, and you only recruit and attract more of the same. And I think the biggest problem right now, which has to do with the lack of reproducibility, you name it, and in this side we know these things, come from that fact that there are not that many checks and balances, because the incentive mechanisms are all in a configuration for this sort of winner takes all mentality, and that's the only game possible. And that comes with a huge cost. And the cost is that you have to, the show must go on. and that I think is turning off a lot of people and a lot of creativity and a lot of good energy that I think we need urgently. So I think there is where DeSci has basically a fundamental role to play.
Amazing. Yeah. I think like one of my favorite terms that you use is the academic cartel, because I think it brings such vivid imagery for me. But I think having listened to what you're saying, if what I understand is correct, is like that the actual systems and the people running the systems in academia are sort of rotten. And there are these misaligned incentives, as we've mentioned. Do you think that this is just inherent to the system, or do you think this is a cultural thing that people have now just like, if someone's mentor was like this, they now grow up and become like that? Do you think it's like there could be a cultural shift in changing the way these institutions are run, or do you think it really lies at the fundamental, like top-down institutional approach?
I think a little bit of both, but I think, I mean, yes, a lot of the sort of symptoms of these sort of problems are present in other industries as well. I mean, if you talk to basically even restaurants, or chefs or any art, or I think there are similar issues. But for example, typical things we make fun in these, I know that you have to pay to publish your paper that then you cannot read because you don't have the money. So in the global south, we pay to publish on these journals that our own institutions cannot read, and we have to go to, sort of alternative places where this thing gets hacked. And, as we saw with Aaron Schwartz, sometimes you get even, threatened to go to jail for having put some papers in the open and things like that. So, for example, the publishing industry is obviously wrong. There is no way to defend it. But hyperproductivity also is really wrong, in the sense that nobody can write 5, Nature Cell science papers a year. So if you are at that level of hyperproductivity, I mean, why do we fool ourselves thinking that whoever is the person in charge of that hyperproductivity machine is even aware of what he or she is writing, right? I mean, that is I have to have a farm or whatever. We can argue that maybe that's better or that's far, but but that person is hardly an intellectual. Maybe he's a manager of that industry. And now we can argue how much of the business should be sort of intellectual, as Feynman said, for the pleasure to find things out, or basically for the pleasure of figuring out. But so I think it's a lot with intensive. I mean, humans can be driven into good or bad a lot by incentives, and I think the incentives are wrong. And I don't think it's something fundamentally wrong with humans. I think humans have the potential for everything, and not everyone is rotten, by the way. I mean, I was very lucky, and they are very. I was very privileged too, at least when I was young, and I had very sort of famous, productive, and good mentors. And nobody's rotten, but to survive in the business, don't forget that once you are in whatever of these positions, let's say a little bit older, and you have postdocs whose life and whose family's income depend on you, you need to keep the machine running, because you can't really close the thing. If you close the thing, you have to fire people. It's basically a business. So the problem is that you want to stay small, but if you stay small, you're useless for the system. The system wants you to grow. But once you go that way and you grow, a lot of people depend on you. You're like a little bit like a mini businessman within the system. So you might even keep it running for a good reason, right? You want to keep your people safe. And I think the younger generations notice the most, because the problem with that is that it's hard to find room for mentoring. And science gets done by young people. And there is and that's another thing for DeSci to work out, which is the interaction between education and science. So science, you don't learn science in the vacuum, and science doesn't get done by people of any given generation. There is a process in which sort of the stick gets passed on, and people by imitation and by joining the lab activities learn. And so education and teaching and mentoring and doing science, they all go together. And I think there's a lot there that is also broken in terms of getting just certifications or degrees versus really getting mentorship. And I think that is also where the system is failing a lot of the new generation, where DeSci also has a lot to do.
Yeah, I mean, I 100% agree. I recall when I studied biochemistry, and I think it's quite interesting because I think you are a unique phenotype in someone who is an academic, seeks knowledge, but also likes to teach knowledge. And I think any sort of person who's been through like university and has known that there's been one, like they've had a lecturer that's just been absolutely hated every minute of lecturing, doesn't really want to share knowledge, and it completely impinges on like your ability to learn and to grow. And I think it's really interesting for me because one of the sort of most broken systems I found was that also a lot of lecturers are not like it's mandatory work for them, like it's part of what they have to do at the university, but they're not really coached on how to teach, how to mentor, all of this, and they actually are thrown into an environment that they're not prepared for. And it really detracts away from the experience of the student. And I've always thought that should be something that's addressed more. And, there should be more education around how to educate.
Yeah, I mean, I see it the same way. I don't know how it is in Afrikaans, but in Dutch, the word te leren is the same for teaching or learning.
Yes.
Teaching or learning in Netherlands is hetzelfde word. So there is no distinction. And also one of the things I keep working every time with younger people, we do a lot with Janneke in terms of running workshops and doing science like workshops and stuff like that. And we like to go all the way from old professors to, really even basic tiny kids in small towns in Patagonia. We even do the workshop. Is that you always learn from the new generations, and not necessarily even in the context of a class, but I always think that there are many times at the same instant in society. So the future is being made by the new generations, and slowly you are fading away and you can no longer see the future. So I mean, the young generations are also like an instrument to gauge the future. So just by being in the process with the younger generations, you are learning yourself. So yeah, I have never understood that view that teaching is somehow of a load. For me, learning quantum physics on my own, or learning how younger generations sort of make up the world, it's sort of very similar, right? It gives me the same pleasure of finding things out.
Mm, yeah. I would be curious. So I think for most people listening to this podcast, they would be familiar with this concept of this, this brain drain out of academia, of like a lot of long time academics leaving academia because, the pay, the lifestyle, the sort of pressure is just untenable. And so I think kind of, would you, given all, first of all, do you think, an accurate assessment that there are sort of people flocking out of academia, and that we're going to end up at this point where there's going to be a bit of a vacuum there? Do you think that is a truthful statement? And then as a follow-up question is, when we're speaking about these young people that you're educating, would you recommend a career in academia to them as it currently stands?
So I'm a scientist. I love researching. For me, finding things out and being in the lab just playing without anything until some observation puts you in the mood of making hypotheses, because the science gets done before the hypothesis. Then it's just basically an algorithm can do it. So these bio agents can do it. The difficult part is before the hypothesis, right? Is when you're playfully, then somehow there is a marvel observation that all of a sudden sparks some curiosity of something you don't understand. So that I love, and that I think I will recommend it to everyone. I mean, ideally, the labs will still exist. I would rather be, if you're lucky and you like computer science, a lot of things are still being done. If you take the latest papers in AI, transformers in Google, augmented generation in Facebook, and all of these sort of things are being done in company labs. Just if you look much more on the natural science, sort of traditional standard science, things have shifted to academia. And that is the problem. And the problem is with what we discussed with academia. So I will recommend, you like science, I recommend it to everyone. And I think in the future, the more we get into a technocracy, the more science becomes a mainstream sort of activity, and applied science and engineering become less applied and even more scientific in a sense. Now, I don't think academia will run out of people, though. There's always people. That was the biggest problem we have, is how to start, less a little bit dependent on the fact of always growing, right? It takes a lot of research in economics and ecological economics to come up with a system that doesn't depend on ever making more humans. We don't know how to do it. Hopefully we'll learn how to do it. But academia, for that reason, there'll always be more people. And you need to understand, these cartels evolve and mature. So at the beginning would be like, I cite your paper, you cite my paper, and maybe I sit on a panel, I'll give you a grant, and you sit on a panel and you give me a grant. But then it started later becoming, when I'm big and you are big, maybe if you give a job to my student or my postdoc, then I give a job to your postdoc. So the big couples, they get jobs to people, and they trade jobs to people, and they get influence to people, and then they build this sort of networks. I want someone that graduated from that lab, that comes from that institution. If I put him here, then you put it there. So then, in this scheme of making this network of people occupying positions, every day is less important any qualities of the people. What matters is the network and the connections. That's what it's actually a slavery job, because you constantly have to be in the loop. So you don't have time to meditate or detach from the conversation, because if you do, you get replaced immediately. I think a lot of the stress of the academic life comes from being on the loop, people's pleasing and political favors and things like that. So that's not going to change, because you don't really need that much intelligence. So even if the talent goes away, they will just need someone with a head able to talk and to go to meetings, and also because the network produced the papers anyway. At some moment, the phenomena shift to a different level. So if you are in the right place and on the right thing, you will get the sciences and natures, because whoever gets onto that node, on that network, will produce those papers, because the institutions themselves need those papers for the money to flow. So I don't think they are in trouble. I think it's just not appealing for the creative new generations, also for people seeking mentorship. But I think if you're lucky and the area of science and everything is, in a sense, interrelated, you could go to that way and bypass academia. And the more we get embedded AI, embedded robotics, and sort of cyborgs, and bio will be more into computing, things like that, slowly, you will have a way to do whatever area of natural science, maybe within the context of a company lab, without the sort of academic sort of promote sort of thing.
Okay, interesting, interesting. Yeah, I mean, I always enjoy these sort of conversations because I think, obviously, a lot of the principles that DeSci is surrounding is sort of, there's a lot of academia is broken and DeSci is trying to fix that. And I think it's really important that we keep returning to the questions of like, what is actually broken, instead of, I think, using sweeping generalizing statements to really, really go into these issues and like chat to people impacted, and like spend their day like facing these issues like you. So I always find these sort of conversations really, really enriching. I am curious if you like, do you think that your academic peers would be open to this concept of DeSci? I mean, do you go and talk about it with the people that you work with, and are they aware of DeSci? Like, what would you say as academics who are not into crypto already? Do they see DeSci as a potential sort of balm to their issues?
I think there are several components along the vertical. So in terms of financing, I mean, the easiest one is sort of the decentralized finance aspect of it, right? So, and there again, I think education has to do, because, for example, I have a lot of colleagues who are lucky enough, I consider, that they don't directly belong to a university, for example. So you do your postdoc, you do grad school, then you become a principal investigator on a research lab. And the research lab might not be part of a company, but it might be part of some sort of other national infrastructure. Let's say the Academy of Science. In the case of some countries, Academy of Science do run labs. You still need to somehow, for example, here you see the importance of education, because if you have your lab, you don't want to populate the lab only with postdocs, and postdocs themselves we would like to engage in interaction with grad students, etc. So most of those cases, even though you are in an institution, you are not getting tenure track, you don't care about being full associate, full professor. You still need to eventually go or send your postdoc to teach in some sort of academic context, because otherwise, how do you recruit grad students? And at the end of the day, who's going to be there in the bench are going to be grad students in the majority. And you also have postdocs, but the postdoc and the grad student, the postdoc themselves wants to have grad students just so them learn how to mentor, learn how to train, and how to engage with new generations. So there you need to bring the educational part. Now, those people, I think, in those institutes will be more open to mutate the system. I think within academia, the easiest part, which is what's taking over, okay, you can mention the crypto later, but academics in general will always accept money. The things will come later, because actually your job as an academic in most of these institutions, really your real job is to get the money in. So basically, when they hire you in a very productive place or a very prestigious place, your job is to bring money in. So when I was in the global north as academic, most of my job was just to get money, write grants. But once you write grants and all of that, a lot of the lobby is to get lobbies and to where to put narratives and papers. But the papers get written, produced, and everything by younger generations. You don't do that, right? You may mentor them, and they will argue maybe that you don't mentor them, but you basically need to pay for the system, and the system means the university wants money from you, the department needs money from you. So they will always be happy to get money from somewhere else. So of course that would have these technicalities that we were talking in the class with IPs and how do you do the transfers and things like that, that I think that's the only obstacle. But that would be basically decentralizing the financing. Now, being more open to the other components, the other verticals, I see a little bit harder, because this sort of idea, this obsession, this romanticism with becoming full professor, almost like becoming the Pope, right? It's a little bit like the church. But it's so into like, I am getting there, just like when the young people want to get their PhD, these academics, they want to get sort of tenure. And to get tenure, the getting tenure game is totally different. I mean, I don't know if DeSci want to even get there. I think it's not that important and not very productive. I think it wasn't in the past and it will not be in the future. But the connection with education and how actual research gets done, and we do need research, just for what we mentioned before, that we have a problem not only on economics, so how to make an economic system that doesn't depend on growth. We also have the same with extractive sort of agriculture and sort of technologies like that, but also with basic science to basically create new forms of energy, new forms of information processes, and also to understand life, understand the ecosystem that support us. So science needs to be done, and it will become more demanding. And I think that's why I think the citizen science movement, if we get fixed the issue that you should be able to get money out of it, you should be able to make a living out of it. And I think DeSci has a lot to say. It's unavoidable. Communities, a lot of people in communities in the world want to understand their sources of food, their sources of water, lots of things that require science and applying science. And if there is an alternative vehicle for them to get that and to get the know-how and to get the machinery, they will do it. And that has nothing to do with this other sort of side story of becoming a professor.
Mm-hmm.
So these days, professors need students. Students don't really need professors. The problem is that to get jobs, you need a degree. And everybody's trapped on this industry of getting degrees. But sometimes getting degrees or going to these classes is not very well aligned with the know-how that you really need today.
100%.
And I think a solution there for DeSci is this idea that you can get a degree in the open space. So a lot of universities, I don't know, but I know the case in Hungary, for example, if you call a committee and you already produced a paper and you have done research in a laboratory, a committee can grant you a PhD. You didn't need to be enrolled in this sort of high school PhD program, which is part of a massive pipeline. So I think DeSci can work out a system in which you could get, I don't know, sort of credential tokens that in some sort of mechanism can then later be validated by some sort of an institution, and you do get degrees, but you undergo a completely parallel program in which you learn relevant knowledge of whatever you are doing.
Mm. Very interesting. Yes, I think somewhere in Poland they offer this sort of concept of you being able to just present to a committee, which I think is a really interesting concept. And it makes sense, you know, if the research is there, the output is good, you could defend it, you know, It makes sense that you should be able to get recognized for it. We are finishing up here, but I think maybe this takes us to a really nice question, which is at the beginning of this call, you said that you were ready to dedicate your life to, you know, DeSci and this new movement, which is a lovely and bold statement. I would love to know what you are thinking your next steps in DeSci might look like. Like, what are you interested in building? What are you interested in working on in DeSci?
So what we're doing is a very biased towards sort of this idea of like beautiful ecosystems that I've seen and the communities living there. And I do see the role of machines. I mean, everything is a machine, but I'm talking particularly basically, you know, sort of algorithmic machines, robots, and those types of machines, open hardware, science hardware. So I like the idea of hybridizing an ecosystems, and I think hybridizing those three things is a path for sustainability. And learning about decentralized physical infrastructure, and also while we were doing open hardware, we started doing a lot of sort of biotic games, which has to do with incorporating living systems to the machinery of a game. For example, Pump Fund does it, sort of Pump Science Fund, Science Pump, I always get confused those names. Does it in a sense that not be a real experiment being part in this case of a memcoin game, but there are several others, non-DeSci, non-crypto games in which you incorporate living systems. So I've been trying to think together with friends, we've been thinking on, can you bring in open science hardware in the sense that people, community, citizen scientists will build instruments, because a lot of natural science has to do with instrumentation. And a lot of the hold of the academic industrial complex is because the instruments are very close, that they're very expensive. But with the open hardware movement, the idea will be to open that up just the same way the open software movement, open software. So can you then bring up biotic gaming? Because another aspect that I learned by playing with new generations is that you don't necessarily in the same semantics. So for example, a lot of times with the students, you think you say something like a word, optics, or quantum mechanics, or any other concept, and you think you're having a conversation, but sometimes it's not so. Sometimes you're using the same words, but you mean completely different things. And sometimes the students are there to pass classes and to get a degree.
Mhm.
Okay, we all have to survive, and their way of surviving is just to get a degree. So they're not necessarily learning what you think they're learning, not be interested. They just want to, come up as good students or get the degree. So maybe I started to look at these sort of exotic computer languages. For example, there are computer languages like Chef or Pete. But Chef, let's take Chef. Chef, you look at it and it looks like a recipe to make chocolate cookies. So if you read it, you think and you can cook it and produce the chocolate cookies. But if you do know the syntax, it's also a hello world program, for example. So
Wow.
the same reason the students are passing, I met students that get excellent degrees cum laude on whatever field, and they're really not interested on the field. They just want to be STAR students. And so the same here, right? You might think that you're learning quantum mechanics, but you're not. You're just passing that. You might think you're cooking chocolate cookies, but in reality, you're executing hello world. So can you also create a machinery that are these instruments, these deployers that deploy instruments? These instruments include getting into ecosystems, either microscopes or sort of submarine robots, you name it, depending on your ecosystem. But then other people can write games that depend on those machines. So you have a deep in infrastructure where deployers deploy machines. Those machines extracts numbers from natural ecosystems. Those numbers get processed in a metaverse where there are game narratives. Other people on their cell phone can contract machines over a blockchain that are being deployed. The deployers get paid for deploying the machines. Ecosystems get sampled. But while you're playing, science gets done. Just like the way you think you're doing is, because actually the other thing is that there is no boundary between what's a game and what is real. I mean, when we live our life as humans in a particular paradigm of way of being, we are playing a game. I mean, academics are playing a game, right? Getting tenure is a game. Being a productive scientist is a game. So maybe there, by just designing these games, building these instruments, you have this decentralized infrastructure that is producing science. So I've been a lot trying to think on that concept. How can you define science in an operational manner? Also to make it narrative independent, because sometimes you don't want to arrive to a place and tell the new generations or tell the inhabitants of a given ecosystem what is the sort of the dominant narrative. I don't want to say curing cancer is good or saving the ecosystem is good. I don't want to depend on having a nice story. I want to present something that is entertaining, engaging. People love nature by themselves. People love machines by themselves. People like games and art by themselves. So can you create a platform in which people will engage for those reasons and science will get done anyway, meaning that we will generate environmental technologies, we'll generate medicines, things like that, but without necessarily talk about it. We might be just having fun playing games and the science gets done behind the scenes by machines. So we're trying to create that. We're not even close, of course. But that's another reason why I'm on the class.
Yes, yes. Yeah, I suppose it's kind of like the Trojan horse model that I was speaking about earlier this week, which is basically you present someone one thing that is, engaging and fun and makes them want to be there and want to do it. And then subtly you're sneaking in a secret good, which is science. And I think, that is the way forward.
In Chile, we have a saying that is like, in Chile, we have a saying that you never know who you work for.
You wanted to, if you're not paying for it, you are the product or something like that.
It actually happens to me. I mean, sometimes when I was younger, people offer me to become the director of this or the director of that, and they might present it to you as if they care about you, but they just wanted someone to, preemptively hold a position for them for other reasons, right?
Yes.
So in life, there's a lot of that. So why not use it for good?
Yes. I like that as a philosophy. Juan, thank you so much. Your brain is so interesting. I think your varied scientific experience is so interesting. I would say that I actually haven't met as many, I haven't met academics that hop around as much as you do, to this point of interdisciplinary research. And I think, I've always believed that is, physics doesn't happen in a vacuum, neither does biology, neither does ecology, all of those sort of things. So I think I love that you have this really broad, interesting scope. And I really enjoy speaking to you. So thank you so much for taking some time today to chat to me and the DeSci podcast. And I'll see you soon.
Yeah, thank you for having me. I have a super nice time. Thanks.
Amazing.